I hope you all had a nice and relaxing break, got to take a moment to get up and walk around. Very happy to have you all back and happy for the second portion of our program today. Kind of reflecting back of what we've already heard and looking at some of the next sessions, we heard Heidi share her personal journey and what she has done as one person to create this international movement. And she's really used her story to help advance that. And then, hearing from Dr. Garst and talking about just reflections from this past year and kind of some of the curveballs thrown by the pandemic and ways that we can boost our immune system and things that we can do ourselves. And then hearing about patient navigation and how we can advocate for what patients really need kind of orients all of us in how our own stories, regardless of where we're coming from, are so important in advancing survivorship. So excited for this second portion where we're really going to talk about the power of our stories. And so first, I would really like to introduce to you Kara Gormley-Meter, who is going to talk to us about using our stories. Kara is an award-winning broadcast journalist with extensive experience hosting, anchoring, and reporting the news. Her expertise gleaned from years in the media positioned Kara as a choice partner to find and tell great stories in ways desirable for optimal media coverage. And after leaving television, clients sought Kara out, and before long, what started as freelance work has turned into the creation of her own marketing and communications firm. So Kara, I will now turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Are we all suffering from Zoom fatigue? Hopefully that break is getting everybody going again. Thanks so much for allowing me to be here today. I am Kara Gormley-Meter, and I am going to be talking about the power in your story. Just a little bit about my personal story. My mom fought a valiant fight against lung cancer for about 3 years. She passed away about 9 months after my oldest son was born. I have 3 kids. And my mom was Barbara Dalton Gormley, and my oldest son is Dalton Meter, named after my mom. And I thought it was so interesting, and I just need to share this with you all. Didn't plan on it, because out of the blue, an old family friend just stopped by our rural house and brought a picture. I'm going to see if I can get it close enough. An old picture of my mother out of the blue this week, right before this conference. And I was thinking, wow, that for me is a God wink that, she's with us. So many of us have our own personal stories. I know before she passed away and after she was diagnosed, she thought about telling her story, or when she saw young people getting cigarettes, she wanted just to go up and share her story with them. So I feel like I'm supposed to be here today, and I'm just delighted to have you all here with me. I have taken a job since running my own communications firm, and now I work at NP Strategy. And thank you very much, Jenny, for kind of being my Vanna White here today. Jenny's helping me with the slideshow. So if you see me doing some of these or referring to Jenny, she's going to help progress us along. But NP Strategy is a full service marketing and communications firm. We have offices in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Texas. And as you're about to see from the next slide, there's a group of individuals that I work with now, a diverse group with all different kinds of backgrounds. But one thing we share in common is we all love to tell stories. There are professionals who are really focused on telling those stories visually through photography or videography, as well as just knowing how to write those stories and find those stories. And finally, we all know that a story isn't very powerful if you don't share it with anyone, if nobody sees it. So we do a lot of media relations work, as well as work getting stories out on social media and other different platforms. With that being said, we'll move on to the next slide. And I am going to show you a number of videos today. So I hope that you might need to pump up your sound a little bit for some of those videos. But first off, just wanted to relive for just a second. I know many of us want to push it behind us, but 2020 for sure was a year of disruption and chaos, with the big stories that just kind of overtook everything, being the pandemic, of course. And then we had a lot of weather events and a lot of social unrest. And media, our lives were consumed by all of these stories and disruption. And for folks who were trying to get their stories out through media or other platforms, there was just a lot of noise focused around a lot of this negativity. And what I think we all found firsthand is what research shows, which leads us to our next slide, that there is good news out there and that good news matters. There are a number of studies, and just to summarize, the studies that we looked at as a firm showed that taking an intentional approach to sharing positive stories can boost employee morale. But when you share those stories on a higher level to a broader audience, those stories can boost the spirits of other folks as well. American psychological research shows, and you all know this, a lot of medical professionals here, that even in normal times, negative news can have an impact on our mental health. And of course, we know it's been a while since we've seen normal times. These are not normal times. So advancing now, there is power in positivity. That is shown. Research shows that. So how do you share your positive stories? A couple of ideas for you as you start looking internally is making sure those positive stories get into your weekly or monthly company newsletters. When your CEO is presenting, if you are in marketing and communications, you help write some of that messaging, put some of those positive stories in the CEO's messaging. Also, social media is our friend. In the old days, you had to wait and really try to get a lot of earned media, television coverage, or sometimes people would pay for media coverage. But nowadays, you don't have to depend on that. There's a huge social media audience out there. Sometimes it's used, social media, for negativity, but we can change that and use it for good. Video, YouTube, a great way to get your stories out. And then earned media. When I say earned media, this is getting media attention without having to pay for it. So you're not really buying a commercial or commercial space or an ad in a newspaper, but earned media is sharing your story with reporters on different levels. And we call it pitching that story in an effort to get your story out there, whether it's on a blog or in a newspaper or on television. That's what we mean by that. Into our next slide now. And when we talk about positive stories and trying to tell those stories, one thing we did internally at NP Strategy soon after the coronavirus hit and we started just feeling kind of that negative strain is we actually created some social media channels that we called Encouraging the Carolinas. Again, heavily, we are embedded in North and South Carolina. And we just started sharing positive stories on our own. We didn't use any internal branding. We weren't trying to go out and get clients from this effort, but it was really kind of an authentic way to show all the good things that were happening out there. And in my life, I have found that when you are authentic and intentional about doing good things, sometimes good things happen. So unintentionally, after sharing these stories, the graphic on your far right shows that through the social media and people starting to share some of the stories you see, there's people donating PPE and a couple examples there. A radio station called up and said, "Hey, Kara, we noticed that you're a big contributor to this Encouraging the Carolinas. Would you come on and share some of the positive stories you're sharing on social media with us on the radio?" So that positivity started spreading. And it was also a great way to use my voice, both on the radio, which was a weekly segment, but we also had some television interest to share these incredible stories, to share your story. There was power in it, taking a positive route. Heading into our next slide, some storytelling techniques that we're just going over. Many of you know these from the get-go, but you want to grab the reader's attention or the viewer's attention right off the top. Unfortunately, studies also show our attention spans as human beings, with all of the different media and distractions out there in our lives, that our attention spans have really decreased. So you want to grab somebody from the beginning to make them take interest, to make them care about your story. You need to focus the story. And instead of really doing the high level stories, we find that if you can really get into those personal stories, to kind of focus you're going to get to the heart and the head. So you're going to have some of those research statistics and important facts about what's around your story, but you want to focus it in on the personal stories that people can relate to. Using visuals helps tremendously in our world, especially on social media now. You can see this huge sway towards video, but also compelling graphics or pictures. Again, we really start to take in the story through those visuals. They make a difference. And then another great storytelling technique is to amplify donor support. So folks who are helping you or your organizations out, make sure you tell those stories too. It makes them happy. It gets more eyeballs through their groups, their organizations, their friends. And when you see how people are giving back and you see how money is being used or volunteers are being used in their efforts, it often has a positive effect in getting more volunteers to join up or maybe more donors to your organization. Talking about great storytelling techniques and visuals leads us to our next slide. And this is going to, one more click will get us to some of those tips to focus on as well. You want to share challenges as well as success stories. So, as we all know, a lot of us with our personal stories, while my mom is no longer here to tell her story, there are still a lot of positives that can be discerned from her challenges. There were a lot of positives that came out of those challenges. So through challenge, we can be positive and also influence others. Be authentic. When a lot of times you may have a figurehead or someone that may not know a lot about your story, but they may be out in front of that story. If they're not real and authentic, people can smell that from a mile away. Being authentic is going to help communicate your story and help people connect with you. You want to create a conversational voice or tone when you are writing your story and when you're pitching your story, if you're in video production, to produce that story. And what I mean by that is, I teach a class at the University of South Carolina in the spring semesters. And what I will do for the students is I'll bring in 3 types of text for them to read aloud. So one may be a legal brief. One might be a big segment of Shakespeare's work. And then another might be a television script. And just when you start hearing people reading those different forms of text out loud, you see that the television script really simplifies things. And while these other forms are useful and sometimes beautiful, when you're trying to communicate a message, simpler can be better, especially if you're doing it through video, or when you're talking to newspaper reporters. Quotes, pithy statements, things that people will relate to and connect with, usually are the best storytelling techniques. And then show and tell. Stories are better with visuals. They tend to be more compelling. And I have an example of this. And Jenny, we can stop it. I think it's going to be around 1 minute and 5 seconds of this story. But I wanted you to get a feel of what I'm talking about. And when you watch the beginning of the story, really take in the visuals, also some of the writing, and then how we used some of the interviews and the pictures to tell this story. So it's probably going to take 2 clicks, one to get us to the video screen, and then the second to start it. I hope you can hear it okay.
In the frenetic pace of life, do you take time to stop and say, wow, to really look around you, to appreciate the little things, to soak it all in? Many of us go on with the hustle and bustle of life until we get a wake-up call. The call that makes us truly see how precious life is. I know what it's like to get that call. I'm Katie Kendall, and I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when I was 12 years old. We barely noticed at first that I was getting sick because I was just so active that we just figured, oh, I'm tired, from all that stuff I'm doing.
I was just asleep one night and had a very, very bad headache and throwing up, and my parents took me to the emergency room, and I was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
I'm going through my last rounds of chemo that I need to get to make sure the cancer doesn't come back, because they already got my tumor out and everything. So I'm just going through the last round of chemo.
Friends of the family.
So thank you for that. Jenny, you're an awesome Vanna. I appreciate it. So I just wanted to show you the beginning of that story. I helped produce that story for Camp Chemo, which is a camp that helps kids with cancer. And of course, you know, you have these beautiful children telling their personal stories. So it's compelling. It captures attention. There is a fine line, especially when we're talking about what we're doing and sharing our stories, where you don't want anyone to feel exploited. That's where being authentic and telling stories for the right reasons really comes into play. But to be able to tell that story in a compelling way, we first started out, we met Katie Kendall, who is narrating that story. We did an interview with her and we started putting her story together. We met some other children, used them in the story, but made her the focus of that story by creating and working with her on a script. So she narrated that story. And I think that it really helps grab attention out there in story techniques. And if we can go on to our next slide. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that stories do come in all shapes and sizes. The way a story moves you is really what's important. And I put a couple of graphics on the side. And unfortunately, one of the reasons I put that Habitat for Humanity graphic up, I'm not able to show you because I put the other one on top of it. But what you're seeing there with that Habitat for Humanity graphic is a woman named Laura. She is in a wheelchair. She's missing one of her legs. And she is out on a Habitat build site. She is a future Habitat homeowner, a Habitat candidate. But when we talk about telling her story, I did a quick interview with her. And this is what she said. And this is short and sweet on social media. When asked why she wants to be a Habitat homeowner, Laura said, "I want a place where I'm safe and can sit outside without having to worry about getting shot." Laura isn't letting the fact that she uses a wheelchair get in the way of working towards her Habitat home. Her motto is, quote, "If my wheels can make it, so can I." Wow, you know, just a quick discussion with a total stranger. And she reveals something about herself. She wants to be able to sit out on a front porch without worrying about getting shot. And she's not letting the fact that she's in a wheelchair stop her. So the picture, which I covered up, is compelling in its own right. Combine that with just a few sentences of her personal story, and it really gets to your heart. I put the Homeless No More graphic in. That's a nonprofit that deals with kind of a continuum of care for homeless families. But I put the graphic in because in addition to the heart and the heartfelt stories, you also have to connect with the head, as we discussed. And this graphic, Homeless No More served over 200 children last year from Family Shelter, which is a shelter that helps families. St. Lawrence Place is also a family shelter, has more of a long-term continuum of care there. And the community, taking in kids from the community through their summer camp and winter spring break camp with this e-learning academy. So folks who have invested in Homeless No More, and some grants have invested directly into their children's programs, get to see, wow, that's pretty impressive. And these couple of family homeless shelters, they served over 200 children in a frame of time. So you're looking to connect with people's hearts in their heads. If people feel something, that in turn makes them want to take action. And, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of these stories, we are trying to raise money for research and to do the number of things that we need to do in order to progress different causes. If we can go to the next slide, you know, a lot of folks that I speak with, and we at MP Strategy have a range of clients, everything from global companies like Lenovo in North Carolina and Samsung, to a lot of nonprofits, to other just small businesses. And I'll often hear, you know, oh yes, those folks have a story to tell. You know, we don't, how would you find our story? We don't really have stories. And it brought me back. And I don't know if you all have seen this reporter. His name is Steve Hartman. He's on CBS. His stories are often featured on the CBS Sunday morning show. But in the old day, his shtick was everybody had a story. And you can see from the lady up top, he would have people like throw a dart on a map. Or in the old days, yes, at Colleen or Jenny, that's a phone book. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but that is how we used to make phone calls before we had these and we had to look up numbers. But he would just open a phone book. And his point was everyone had a story, and he would be blindfolded and touch a page. And then he would go and do a story on whomever was chosen, and wherever the lady threw her dart, he would go in and find a story there. So there are stories, everybody has one. And I put one of his stories on, and that's going to be next, just to show you this point, that even when people are very, very quiet, they often have a lot to say. So that'll bring us to our next slide, which you'll have to click twice to get to that video.
Keep moving, that's it. Slow and steady does it.
The Oregon Trail Interpretive Center shows what life was like for the first settlers in Baker Valley.
Keep the pace up, Johnson.
And how I wish those pioneers were still here today.
Here's the exciting part.
Because I could have used a good team of oxen to pull a story
Eric Colton
out of this covered wagon.
You're not the most outgoing guy.
No.
You don't say a whole lot.
I'm awful shy.
Like 1 or 2 word answers kind of thing.
Yep.
Chatty Cowboy here.
Am I supposed to look right into that thing?
No.
Lives on a 4,000-acre ranch with his equally camera-shy wife, Darcy, their daughter, Shelby, and their son, Talon, who they swear was not adopted. Eric and Darcy met in school, and true to form,
You realize how strange this is going to sound to most people?
I know.
he proposed
I guess it would.
on the phone.
What about a ring? What'd you do with the ring?
So,
You what?
I sent it in the mail.
Uninsured.
But she got it.
Yeah, she got it all right.
The letter folded in the box said, "Howdy." He starts every letter, "Howdy. How's my fiance?"
I should probably explain. Eric isn't that shy. He was just never around here. After high school, he joined the Marines, lived in California, Japan for a while, came home briefly to get married. Yes, he did see her for that. But then left again on a 7-month tour of duty that gave him the story of his lifetime.
But I think probably every day. Sometime a day I think about it.
Eric fought in the Gulf War and was one of the first ones in to liberate Kuwait.
In some of the villages they had women and men just murdered right there in their lawns and still laying there.
For a guy who's not a big talker, this is perhaps his toughest subject. And yet, to really know Eric, all you have to do is stop for a minute and look at the flag. Look at how he placed it so prominently in the center of his yard.
I'll sit out here on the deck and watch it. It's a good sight.
This is a guy who joined the Marines, not as a career or to learn a trade. His reason was that plain, old-fashioned one.
I feel it was my duty.
And maybe that's why, if you ever go to the George Bush Library in College Station, Texas, if you go into their Gulf War exhibit, you'll find there, encapsulated in mylar, preserved forever, a letter from a soldier that begins, "Mr. President, howdy." The library picked that letter over the thousands of others sent by soldiers because they say it was one of the most sincere and simple. "We will not let the American people down," Eric wrote. "As a United States Marine, Mr. President, I promise you and the rest of the country, we will win this one."
I've never been a big believer in you had to talk to get across to somebody. It's what you do for them, or certain things you do. It's just as good as words.
And that's how even a quiet man can speak for a nation. Steve Hartman, CBS News, Baker County, Oregon.
So there you have it. And again, this guy, he has a ton of stories like this where he meets people. And, you know, in this fast-paced world, often we don't take a lot of time to communicate with folks. But when you really do, and again, a lot of you professionals, who've been in a situation, and very intense situations, you do find out a lot about people's stories. Everybody has a story to tell. If we can go to our next slide. Another way to tell stories and to find power in your stories is to humanize leaders. So this just happens to be a scene, or a couple of different scenes from where I work. The gentleman who founded NP Strategy, that's him on the left shooting some hoops. He's a bit of a competitive soul, but he brings in just different fun things and gets folks active during the day and encourages folks to talk to each other and have some playful time to get to know each other. So we grabbed that footage kind of behind the scenes. It's just a picture there. We didn't share it or anything, but when people see leaders in a casual setting with personal interviews, still being professional, but to see some of the human side about them, that's another way to really get your stories across. So when I say that with your organizations, the groups that you work with, those leaders sometimes have a lot of weight in the community, and telling their stories is really a great way to tell yours. On the right-hand side here, I was just, because it's some of what I do, kind of looking around Instagram, and all of a sudden I looked and, oh, there he is. His name is Leighton Lord. He's on the right-hand side there behind a tree. Now, he didn't tag our company. I just happened to see him there. And then that's how I learned he's part of this effort. I got to get my glasses. Is it 10,000 trees or 100,000 trees? I guess it's 10,000 trees. So he's in this group, and they're going around and planting trees in areas of the city where they feel like, around where the company is located in Columbia, where they feel like more trees are needed to try to beautify neighborhoods. So I saw that there, and I just thought, wow, that's a real moment. That would be a moment. I don't know if we've shared that yet at NP Strategy, but I will, because when people are being real and authentic, it's a great way to connect with others, and it's a great way to tell your story. Our next, we have a short video here. These last few videos, thanks for bearing with me, are short ones, but this is an idea of how to humanize your leadership from a group that was skeptical about storytelling. The Kaysen group is a group that's basically an insurance broker. And, they'll be the first to tell you insurance, woohoo, insurance, it's boring. How are you going to tell our stories? So we said, we want to humanize you, but also show a lot about what you're doing professionally. So this is what we came up with.
My wife and I just had our 20th anniversary, which is pretty cool. We've got 3 kids, all teenagers. I did run my first marathon last year. You come in to the finish line, there was probably 50 people deep for a quarter of a mile. They weren't cheering for me, but I surely felt like they were. I'm Eric Griffin, Executive Vice President at the Kaysen Group. We're not firemen, we're not policemen, we're not professional athletes. I think there's only a few specific jobs where people grow up dreaming of being in that business. Insurance is not necessarily on that list, right? And yet I believe in it. We've been on this huge growth path over the last 20 plus years. The traditional advisor that we served 20 years ago did small group medical insurance 90% of the time. We still serve that producer, but now we're also working with banks and financial advisors and commercial property and casualty agents and CPAs. The life insurance side of our business is really growing, and that has been a big success story for us over the last 10 or 12 years. We've added since then long-term care insurance and disability insurance. So it's the same heartbeat of the company, but just multiple different product lines. Columbia is our oldest market. We have some of our strongest relationships here, but in terms of speed of growth, I would say it's in some of the other metro markets that we're serving: Atlanta, Nashville, the Raleigh-Durham area, Charlotte. Tons of potential in those cities, and we're growing quickly there. I think the difference with the Kaysen Group is the culture. Kaysen Group's purpose statement says, we exist to provide employees a platform to serve, to be challenged, and to be a light in the marketplace. And again, we don't always get that right, but we work hard to try to fulfill it.
So a lot of what I'm showing you are highly produced videos. We took extra time and energy and used really nice equipment and lighting to tell those stories. So I wanted to also show you another highlight video where we were just trying to introduce some team members and to show professionals in a laid back setting shot with a camera phone. And that's next.
Hi, I'm Joshua Simonton, a Strategic Communication Specialist at MP Strategy.
Hi, Josh. What is one hobby you picked up during quarantine?
One hobby I picked up during quarantine is cooking. I found a bunch of recipes that I like, but my favorite one is a honey garlic teriyaki pork chop. I even posted my pictures on Instagram and gave myself the name #ChefQuarantine.
That's fun. Name one historical figure that has had an impact on your life.
The biggest historical figure would probably be Frederick Douglass. He was a great orator and a champion of liberation for the African Americans in the 1800s. I just think he was such a monumental figure in the movement to end slavery, so he would be probably my top guy to pick for historical figure.
Lastly, what is the biggest highlight of your professional career so far?
The biggest highlight of my professional career was covering the 2019 U.S. Open at Pebble Beach in California. That was incredible. The views were insane. I also was standing 2 feet away from Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, Tony Finau, all the big golfers. So I would say that's probably the biggest highlight and accomplishment of my career.
So Josh is one of my colleagues in our Charlotte office. I wanted to show you these videos, not to just show you one side and different videos of what we're doing, but to think about how you can use some of these storytelling techniques and visuals in telling your own story. So the Tuesday team talks, the video you just saw, that's something that we use on social media. We use in newsletters and some of our internal communications so people can get to know each other. Our team has been growing by leaps and bounds over the last year or so. So that's one method that we're using to let folks know who we are, where we are, and a little bit about the people that they're working with. That is a very easy way, using some of our camera phones and some of those just very simple techniques can yield some great results, especially on social media. I'm running out of time, so I wanted to get to the power in your pitching segment as well, because outside of looking at writing your stories, finding your stories, how are you going to capture those stories through the video, through the pictures, through the graphics? We want to have as many eyeballs on those stories as we can. So if we could advance the slides, we need to attract perhaps media attention. Can we go back to one? I don't know if you can, and if you can, it's not a huge deal. But attracting media attention nowadays is different than it was a couple of years ago, and especially with COVID coming into play. Kind of in the old days, we relied on just a press release. There was kind of a high level view of what was going on. And then you'd send this press release perhaps to a list of state media outlets, tons of different media outlets. We have found that press releases are not as effective as they used to be. It may be a tool as an attachment, but you need to have some compelling storylines that can go along with the press release in many circumstances. So to attract media attention, we have kind of a do's and don'ts list. Let's see if it stays up if you click that one more time. Yeah, so do. You want to find a compelling hook. I spent many, many years inside a television station's wall, and you know how a television day works. And this was when everyone could be in an office. In North Carolina still, a lot of coverage is virtual, although we have seen over the last few weeks, people starting to do more face-to-face coverage. I'm talking about broadcast media. The traditional media like newspapers and blogs are still doing a lot of Zoom or phone calls, but you want to find a compelling hook. They have a story, they're assigned it usually the morning of. They have a certain allotted time when it comes to broadcast media. Now there are many shows, so you've got to have something at 4, maybe 5, 6, or 7. So every second of a reporter's day counts, and a lengthy email that fails to get to the point can get easily overlooked. That's why I don't like just sending press releases anymore. I like to send the press release, but accompany it with a small picture story that kind of outlines what the reporter could do. Create a one-stop shop. Offer B-roll. B-roll is the video footage or graphics, an interview. Have things already lined up in order to make it easy for the reporter. they'll have pretty much everything they need. In addition to today, I'm actually working on, there's a story being shot right now in Pitt County, North Carolina. It's probably about done now, the actual video shoot part of it. But they couldn't get, and it had to do with a high school. They couldn't get inside the high school, so we had to arrange some distancing where they could do the video outside the high school. And because it's not a traditional school day, the story they were working on had to do with school buses. So how could they get some video of the school buses? So I lined things up well in advance. There were a number of students involved. There was a teacher involved, some companies involved, had everything lined up. I found some video footage, had to do with an app making contest, and found the video footage of that was through Zoom and sent that Zoom link. Had some still pictures of the awards that the kids won for winning the app contest. And I sent that all in kind of a package. So when that reporter is zooming through, she has enough to make a story out of pretty much with the content that I sent her, because nowadays it's so hard for them to go to places and get video. Keep that in mind as you're pitching your story. If we could advance to the next slide. You also, I say use news judgment for anyone who has any type of news or broadcast background communications. A newsworthy story, what we consider newsworthy in the news business, something timely. You know, if it's to look ahead, to really look at the calendar and what's coming up in your organization's the weeks or months ahead in the calendar, and see how you can proactively pitch those stories, to think about it ahead of time and have things lined up and ready to go. So it's not old news by the time it reaches a reporter. You want to make it local. I'm going to show you a video from a global company, but their North American headquarters is in North Carolina. And so while they do things on a global scale, if you're pitching a story in North Carolina, it has to have those North Carolina ties, the North Carolina research, the North Carolina people, make it local. Sometimes you want to bring in, public figures. What makes the speaker worthwhile? Make them prominent, worth listening to, if that's applicable to the story. Other stories, odd and unique, a little bit out of the ordinary, or relevant, an issue that's on the top of, not mind, and there's supposed to be a D there. Also make sure you spell your slides correctly when you go to present them. So excuse me on that one, but that's an issue that's top of mind. The next slide talks about reporters' beats. In the old days, again, that press release, you may send it out to the whole state that you're dealing with, or the county you're dealing with. But now it's really important to kind of know the reporter and their beats. And what we mean by that is, if it's a healthcare related story, often there are healthcare reporters in a broadcast market. So find out who those reporters are, reach out to them. The same is true with government or politics. If it's a legislative issue, get to know the folks covering the issues that matter to you and your organization. And if you have a story, pitch it to those folks, pay attention, bring up their work from the past or something that you might have been impressed with. Why are you going to that reporter? That may ensure coverage for you more than just throwing it out and just throwing out a net. And then finally, just to be courteous, if someone does a good job, let them know, follow up and say thanks, even if it's a quick email. It really does go a long way. There was a writer that I actually had some conflict with. I wasn't sure that I thought his story was balanced. And for the company that I'm working with and helping promote. And so I let him know in a very graceful way. And we had a nice conversation. And at the very end, he said, "I'm so glad you reached out, because as a writer, we just really, really appreciate that people are reading, even if you don't always agree with what you're reading. Thanks for reaching out, that you're reading the story." So those are some of the do's. Some of the don'ts when you're talking about pitching, pitch a story without really knowing the story. Oh, this seems like a good idea, but you don't have the research, you don't have the pictures, you don't have the small picture story. Don't throw it out there if you're not ready. Go back to some of that news judgment that we had earlier. Don't hesitate to follow up, especially right now. where we're bouncing back from COVID, but not completely yet. You know, a lot of reporters are working from home. Everything is moving at a slower pace. And so you might be there sitting, oh, they're thinking, sitting and saying, they have ignored my story. They don't care about my story. You know, your organizations, when the truth is, they may not have gotten it, or it may be out there, or so many email, they've been flooded in Zoom calls that it's not top of mind. It's okay to follow up. And that's where having relationships too with some of the journalists really help. And then finally, advancing, I think I have one more. Okay, so this was the story I was going to tell you. And this is our last story, folks, coming to the end of the presentation, but just some media pitching in action. And this goes to the point of knowing your people and knowing your story. So this is an example. Lenovo is a global technology company. Their headquarters based in Raleigh. And, you know, the stories go beyond pitching technology or, you know, just the intricacies of what their company does. It goes into the people and the community aspect. Lenovo is and finds of the utmost importance, makes it a priority to be part of the community and give back to the community. And so we were kind of looking at what was coming up in the month ahead. And this was right in the middle of COVID and everything, you know, virtual volunteerism. And one of the things that Lenovo was doing is they were helping this virtual volunteer day with Special Olympics. And one of their employees was pushing that commitment because, well, I'll let you see, he has a very special reason, but that's why he prompted Lenovo to really take focus on Special Olympics in North Carolina. And when I saw what was happening behind the scenes, I'm like, this is such a beautiful story. So we reached out to this reporter and she said, Manna, I love this story. And this is what happened.
Special Olympics North Carolina and Lenovo are in the midst of a 10-week program called Partner Up, Power Up, encouraging those with and without intellectual disabilities to stay active through conditioning challenges, including a variety of cultural dances. Michael Jackson's Thriller, a classic Halloween song bringing joy to hundreds of athletes.
We wanted to give the athletes and other participants kind of an outlet where they can go and show off their costume. It's just so fun.
The energy that the instructor brought, the acceptance that they brought, as much as you want to be doing the exact same thing as Michael Jackson, I think it was great to be part of that.
Alex has been involved with Special Olympics for over 20 years, thanks to his older brother Justin, who has special needs. Alex wanted to share that love for Special Olympics with his coworkers at Lenovo.
We were looking to do a Lenovo month of service, and this year it was vastly different due to COVID in that we were doing all virtual volunteering. Really, it's turned out to be way more amazing than I ever envisioned.
These past 5 weeks have been amazing. We could not probably reach the success we did without Alex's passion for helping not only his brother, but others like his brother.
Over 3,000 people across North Carolina are participating in the program, thanks in part to Alex and Justin. But for the brothers, Special Olympics is just an added bonus to their relationship.
He shows up, he said, ask me, how's my day? I say, brilliant to him.
I think it's been ingrained in me from a very young age. I'm truly grateful that I have a brother who's in Special Olympics that has led me to that opportunity. I see it as a blessing.
The program runs through November 20th, finishing with a dance party to celebrate. Reporting in Durham, Bridget Condon, ABC 11 Eyewitness News.
So thankfully, I made it. I think I'm still on time with a minute to spare, but I hope that I gave you some good examples and some thoughts as you move forward in both developing your story and pitching your story and going deeper into those pitches and getting some attention and traction that will bring in big donors or folks who are interested in the ideas that Lung Cancer Initiative has and just to advance survivorship. Thanks for joining me, everybody.
Kara, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. What struck me is a lot of the synergies of what you were talking about with best practices, having just seen Heidi and how she's used her story and being authentic. And you talking about humanizing your leaders. I thought about the medical providers, and that video that Chris showed of them building the ribbons. But the takeaways were excellent. Thank you so much. I don't know if there were any questions in the chat. I know I had one question. Kara, if you're a lung cancer advocate and maybe you don't have a lot of connections with the media or, in that communications community, where would you tell somebody to start? How can they start if they want to tell their story, but they don't know where to go?
Sure. I think a lot of it is, do you have a favorite media outlet? And a lot of days, probably people say, no, none of them, because there's a lot of negativity out there. But especially on the local level, I encourage people to read and see what certain reporters are covering. Find folks that you can relate to or that you're interested in reading their writing or viewing their stories. I feel like from a reporter standpoint, you can tell if a reporter is authentic. Are they going to really take the time to delve into the story? And in the case of everything that you all are doing and some of the stories that I deal with, they're sensitive. You need someone that's not going to go in there with this kind of investigative, in your face type of attitude. You need someone with compassion that can really do the story service, that will be respectful to the people that you put them in touch with. So get to know those reporters through viewing. Nowadays, it's easy. If you can't be in front of a television, but you have a favorite station, go and kind of watch some of the stories in your spare time on your computer, read the newspaper online, whatever. And then, especially if you have a story to tell, and then start reaching out. You could start making early contact. Hey, Will, I just really love this story that you did on whatever, and even try to reach out. And you can do that now on social media through their social media sites. One thing that I'll say, Paige, Twitter is a place to be where a lot of media hangs out, a lot of reporters on Twitter. So if you want to start making those connections in a very rapid way, maybe go and be appreciative to some of those reporters and make those connections online. I would suggest Twitter. And they start recognizing your name and they start seeing where you're from. And then, I don't know, for other folks who are on social media, I have folks, and even some of you all, where I've only, met you a couple of times or been a part of an hour meeting, but feel like I know you or have a much deeper connection just because following on social media. If they see you showing up and they start recognizing your name or your organization, they will take notice when you send that press release, especially, when you send it with a little note or the email blurb with the press release or with more information.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
And I don't know, Kara, are you able to stay on for our networking in a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, because I know that I see some great comments even coming up in the chat, and we'd love to continue this conversation. So thank you. Thank you for staying on.